Hey, welcome to our sermon series going through the book of John, called it Abide. And I'm Pastor Dave Burrows of the Crossing Church. We meet over in the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State. I know many of you are, well, you're all joining in online, those of you watching this, but most of you are not attending the Crossing, you live elsewhere, and glad to have you with us. Thanks for tuning in every week and being a part of this. I'm trying something a little different this morning. Got a few candles going. They're not real candles, those little battery lit ones, but I really like them. And I was going to try a different background. I was going to do this whole sermon in Zoom, and because in Zoom you can have different backgrounds, like virtual backgrounds, so it could look like I'm at the beach, that kind of a thing. And so I was trying that out, but it just didn't look like it was going to work. Looked like it was going to be a fail. So I'm going with just a few candles and made my bed. Hopefully that's enough. Let's see where we are here. But fails are something I was going to talk about today, and the Zoom meeting background may have been a fail. The candles, and I think this is going to be fine, but I don't think the Zoom thing would have worked out. But fails are things that, we all have stories, fail stories. My mom, who I believe is watching this, hi Mom, has some of the greatest fail stories I've ever heard. I just love you, Mom, and love your stories. My kids love to talk about some of those stories you've shared with us. And I've got a number of fail stories in my life, and one back in, I did Taekwondo as a kid and failed to kick the board in. My parents remembered that one. I think it was a confidence crusher. I'm not sure I ever totally recovered from that. But and then there was another time, same year, at a neighbor's yard, they let me drive their quad, and I'd never done anything like that before. And my first move, they had one of those big pools you set up out in the yard and with the sides, and I just drove right into that thing. That was my first and only move, I believe, on the quad, was to drive right into it. Again, it took me another 25 years or whatever before I got on a quad again. And when I did, that was a fail, and I fell off the thing and thought I'd broken my back. So I'm not made for motorcycles, quads. It's just not my thing, I guess. And then, I've got lots of fail stories. I've shared one recently about my silly dance I did on the Ballymore machine at Home Depot. The Ballymore's that lift, and I thought I'd done a good job up there, and I did a little dance in front of all the Home Depot guys, and it just did not go over. And it was my bally dancing, I call it now. I'm a bally dancer, and I won't let it happen again. That was my first and last bally dance, I think. But I've got fail stories. You've got fail stories. We've all got stories where we've failed, where we've blown it, where we've gone too far. We've just got something completely wrong. And some of these stories are fun, like the ones I'm sharing, are for the most part just fun and embarrassing, perhaps. But for the most part, no one got hurt, and that's why I can share the stories and have, you can kind of laugh and giggle about, somebody driving into someone's pool. Nobody got hurt. Other times there are fail stories that we also have that aren't so fun to share because either ourselves or somebody else does get hurt, right? And it's not always, a physical thing, not just because we did drive a quad into somebody or whatever it is, but sometimes it's an emotional thing, something we've hurt somebody with our words, or we've failed in those kinds of ways and harmed somebody, and those are stories that aren't fun to share. So there are fun ones that are fairly harmless, and then other fails that really do come to harm. And we're starting in chapter 18 in the Gospel of John. If you want to get your Bible ready, you can either pause me or just kind of keep listening in the background while you grab your Bible or open it up on your phone. But we're starting something different here in chapter 18. The last 5 chapters, starting with 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, were all basically Jesus teaching his disciples. It's mostly red letter. And in fact, I think in the whole New Testament, it's the longest stretch of just red letters, I think. Going through those chapters, Jesus teaching his disciples in the last moments, and then the last 3 sermons have all been his prayer in chapter 17. But we're going to change back now, starting in 18, to narrative. So we're back to the story. So we kind of took a pause there, a long pause, where it wasn't that that this was happening in real time. But there wasn't like, then this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. It was pretty much Jesus sitting or walking with his disciples and telling them, some things to come and some things to look forward to and some things that were going to be difficult. Some things that had really upset his disciples, actually. Stuff on the horizon. They were going to be persecuted, hated by the world, and one would betray and one would deny and all that kind of stuff. So now what we start to see in chapter 18 is we get to see those events start to actually play out. So Jesus has said these things will happen. In 18 they start to happen, and that's what we're going to be reading about today. And some of these events were what I would describe as epic fails. They were major fails, as well as a major non-fail. So we're going to look at some fails and then a non-fail in the story today. So if you got your Bible, open it up if you would to John chapter 18. And I'm going to read a little bit, read a little bit, and talk. So just kind of leave that open and be ready to listen and follow along, and then I'll make a few comments as we go along. So it starts chapter 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, that's the last 5 chapters. Okay, when he'd spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. And Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. Then Judas, having received a detachment of troops and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, "Whom are you seeking?" Let's stop there and note a few things. Firstly, Judas knows right where to find Jesus. And it's not because Judas had been spying, right? It's because this is where Judas had been with Jesus for the last 3 years. You know, if they weren't traveling around, they were coming and hanging out in this garden. He knew it well. He knew exactly where to find him, because this is just where he had spent time at the feet, if you will, of the Master, listening to him, along with everybody else for the last 3.5 years, considering his words, considering the implications of what he was saying about himself, considering the events of the day. You know, the healings and miracles they'd seen, the signs they'd witnessed, the water turned to wine, the walking on water. You know, Judas was there for all this stuff. And it says in the other Gospels, it tells us that Judas and the others had also performed miracles. So there he'd been for 3 years in this garden with Jesus, reflecting and having opportunity to reflect on what it all means. And so we need to, as we read this and realize it's playing out, Judas is the betrayer. He's not just some outside spy. He's not a bad guy that you know is infiltrating the ranks of the disciples. He was a disciple. That's who he was, and he had been for 3 years. I talked about this when we talked about how Jesus, you know, predicted the betrayal. That we need to get in our heads and just know that Judas was a disciple that the other ones never would have guessed would have done what he did. Never suspected him. That's who Judas was. And so very, very, all the more painful and tragic to see this play out. The other thing I want to have us notice is John's description of the scene. John has been very purposeful in his gospel about contrasting light and darkness, right? Light represents Jesus and belief, and darkness represents evil and unbelief, the world. And so he's always, you know, something about light and something about darkness. You know, and I noted that it was important that Nicodemus came at night, and that Judas left to go betray Jesus at night. You know, the fact that it's in darkness shows that there was unbelief in those moments. Jesus had told his disciples, he said, "A little while longer the light is with you. Walk while you have the light, lest darkness overtake you. He who walks in darkness does not know where he is going." He'd already told his disciples this. He'd already told Judas this. And now Judas comes, and it says, with lanterns and torches. And we need to see, I think John is bringing out, it's not just that we have, so that we, you know, he's not just reporting some facts. Well, they showed up with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Was there anything else? No, I think those are the 3 things. Got to get that down. Judas shows up with false light. And you say, well, maybe you're reading something into that, but not in John's gospel. John has been so purposeful about including these details and and sticking with them, these metaphors, that now that Judas has chosen not to walk in the light of Christ. And so his light has to be false light. And it's not, you know, it's not that Jesus was a literal like flashlight, you know, walking around, but metaphorically, okay, and spiritually, this is what's happened. And John's showing how it even looks in the moment. That he shows up with torches and lanterns because he's no longer walking, or never has, walked in the light of Christ. And so what we have here in this moment, of course, is the peak of Judas's failure. You know, this is an epic fail, historically one of the biggest fails of all time was the betrayal of Christ by Judas. And so this is that playing out now in John chapter 18. I also want us to notice what happens as Judas and these troops approach, and the religious leaders, is John says that Jesus went forward. And so they approach him as he's there with his disciples, just finished up a prayer. And these men all approach, these troops and everything. And it says that Judas went forward. And again, this is an important detail for John, because in John, he's the one who makes it most clear of all the gospel writers that this didn't just happen to Jesus and then God made something good of it, And nobody else says that, but we need to see clearly that Jesus chose this, that he went forward. He laid down his life, right, and no one took it from him, just as he said. And so this little detail that Jesus went forward, right, when they approach, he didn't kind of step back or hide behind a tree, make them find him, or, it's silly to imagine those kinds of things, but he actually walked into this, and we need to see he's walking into this crucifixion, eyes wide open. And so he went forward and said to them, "Whom are you seeking?" Verse 5, they answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am he." And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. And that's important. Now, this is where Judas stands. He stands with them. Now when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. And this is interesting. I think it's only in John that we have this detail. So the answer to, whom are you seeking? And they say, "Jesus of Nazareth." This is important because it gives away, of course, the perspective and belief of this group who have arrived. They're looking for a man, a mere man. And John has been so careful in his gospel to point out he is, he is man, and we got to get that, but he's also God in flesh, the Word who was in the beginning. And so now we see where they stand on the issue so clearly. This whole group have shown up, and they're looking for the man, Jesus of Nazareth. So the words give them away, and that's important too to this gospel. So Jesus responded, and this is lost in most English translations. And I'm glad to be able to point it out today for you. But they say, he says, "Whom are you seeking?" They say, "Jesus of Nazareth." And Jesus responded with, "I am." And most of our English translations respond with, "I am he." All they're trying to do there is, the he in some translations, you'll notice it's italicized, which doesn't mean it's getting emphasis. It means it's not a word that's in the original Greek. It's been added in by the translators to try to help make sense grammatically. And so we have a complete sentence. I am he. I am he. And so that's what we get. But Jesus didn't say, "I am he." He said, "I am." Those are the only words, that John recorded him saying. He isn't in there. And of course, for the readers of John, we should be seeing and hearing, here's the "I am" that he's been saying all along. This is the final "I am" statement from Jesus. As he's been going on, and he said, before Abraham was, "I am." That was the big one up until this point. But he's also been the door, and he's also been, "I am the good shepherd. I am the light of the world," right? We've had all of these, and now they say, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. He says, "I am." And so I don't think, as it's often been taught, that their falling over was a response to simply like Jesus's power. Jesus is so powerful that when he speaks, people fall down. True enough. I'm not about to argue with that. But this, I think John is making a theological statement more than simply hey, in case you didn't catch it after reading all these signs, Jesus is powerful, right? We've seen that, and John has already been careful to handpick only certain miracles, records them as signs to show, the deity of Christ and his power. So we've seen that. So the fact that he speaks, "I am," and they all fall down, I don't think is simply, a response to, whoa, the power of God. I think John is making a theological statement, if anything here. It's the final "I am." It's been building, and now they're feeling the weight of this truth that Jesus is, the one who is in the beginning, with God. "I am," before Abraham, all that theologically, building up throughout the gospel, and then these guys feel that impact, if you will. Pretty neat moment. But just so you know, as you read through that again, the he wasn't there in the original text, and so it's another I am statement from Jesus. Really important that we see that. And then in verse 7, then he asked them again, whom are you seeking? So they all stand back up, I guess. Whom are you seeking? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answered, I have told you that I am. And again, he isn't in there. I have told you that I am. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way, that the saying might be fulfilled which he spoke, of those whom you gave me, I have lost none. Now, I want to go back to something. Let's stop there. I want to go back to something that Jesus said in chapter 10. And this was the section on I am the good shepherd. Jesus said back in chapter 10, he said, most assuredly I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly. Verse 11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. But a hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he is a hireling and does not care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep and am known by my own. As the Father knows me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Here in John now we see this play out. What Jesus said about the good shepherd and being the door, it's not just a collection of lovely and important sayings that Jesus said. John is showing us this actually played out in real time. Jesus protected his disciples. He gave them safe pasture, right? He was the good shepherd who, gave his life for the sheep. Take me, but leave these men alone, right? Is what he tells them. And so Jesus actually does, in real time, real life, provide safe pasture in this moment for his disciples. He stands in front as the door, right? Protecting them from the thieves and the robbers who want to come in and steal and destroy. Really cool to see that play out. So again, in chapter 18, we're seeing all this stuff Jesus has been talking about. These events start to actually happen, and it's not just, it puts some teeth on these things Jesus said about being the good shepherd. Things that we can go, wow, he really meant that. Like he did that in real time, in real life for his disciples. He provided for them a safe pasture when they could have all been arrested. Let these ones go. And they did. They didn't arrest those guys. Then in verse 10, see, what they needed to do, though, is trust the good shepherd to do that for them, to give them safe pasture. And here we have an instance of one who I didn't believe trusted in Jesus to be the good shepherd in that moment. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. In this moment, as I see it, Peter is failing in a number of ways. I think also, failing to be a nonviolent disciple, as I believe Jesus teaches us to be. But other than that, he's also failing to trust in the good shepherd, that the good shepherd will provide safe pasture for his sheep. And I see Peter in this moment trying to be, in a sense, taking upon himself to be the good shepherd, to be the protector of the sheep, and to be the protector of Jesus even, right? I think his intentions are noble, as we'll find most often with Peter. I don't think he's intending to do ill or wrong here, but it's a fail. And he resorts to violence, which is what he understood. What he understood. There's a fail. This is what comes naturally, and for many people, this is what comes naturally when we see a moment where there's danger and the desire to protect. And Peter does this through violence. He cuts the guy's ear off, which is a strange thing to do. And I've said before, I don't think he was aiming for the guy's ear. I don't think he was just trying to give a message to the rest of those Romans watching. Don't mess with us. I think he was probably going for his head, and the guy sees it coming and he gets an ear. So anyway, but this is the kind of thing that many of us as human beings will do. resort to what comes naturally when we feel that, kind of mama bear or whatever, that sense of I want to protect. And we'll resort to violence, which is what Peter does here. And I think in a sense Peter's saying, I know you're the good shepherd. You said you'll provide safe pasture, but let me handle this, right? He didn't even have time to get all those words out, but I think that's what's happening in the moment. Peter learned a tough lesson that day. And Jesus responded to him. Verse 11, so Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into the sheath. Put that thing away. What are you doing? Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? So Peter has a major fail here. He's stepping on Jesus' toes as being the good shepherd who provides safe pasture for his sheep, protects his own sheep. But he's also now impeding, as Jesus puts it, impeding on God's eternal plan to save the world. This plan has been set before the foundations of the world, and Peter gets in the way. This is important. It's important that Jesus be arrested and crucified. And here's Peter, again, out of a noble heart, out of misunderstanding, he fails and actually steps in the way of this plan to save the world through this final sacrifice. And Peter tries to say, no, you can't do that. So Peter really blows it here. He gets in the way. I live in a family of 8 altogether here in the household, and it's easy for people to get in the way. We live in a 2-bedroom house, and whether they mean to be or not, people are often in the way, just trying to get down the hallway or get into the kitchen or have a conversation. You've got people in the way, and Peter in this moment was in the way. I don't think it was intentional. I don't think he's trying to ruin Jesus' plan to save the world. I don't think he's trying to step on Jesus' toes as a good shepherd, but he is. And definitely having to learn a tough lesson that day on that one. Verse 12. Then the detachment of troops and the captain, by the way, John doesn't record this, but the other Gospels do, as Jesus then heals this man's ear. He has to fix, Peter's error, and how embarrassing that must have been. For Peter, he might as well have poked out someone's eyes, right? And then Jesus has to come and heal the blind man now because Peter's blown it, right? That's what happens when you see that in the other Gospels, not here in John. But verse 12, then the detachment of troops and the captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. And they led him away to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Now it was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. That was his prophecy we heard earlier on. His misunderstanding completely about how it works. And so now begins Jesus' trial. This is going to go on into the next couple chapters here. But as you remember, as I've talked about, as we've gone through John, Jesus has been on trial the whole time. The whole book is Jesus on trial. And he's brought with, witnesses have been brought forth throughout the gospel. John the Baptist, first of all saying, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And then Philip and Nathaniel and Peter witnesses, he is the Christ. The woman at the well witnesses to the Samaritans, could this be the Christ? No, he told me everything I ever did. And they've been witnessing to the truth throughout this whole thing. Now, as we kind of zoom out a bit, get a bigger picture even, the following section is about Jesus' trial, yes, but it's also Peter's trial. Peter's also on trial here. Both men are being tried, and that's what I want us to see here. One fails in his trial and crumbles under the pressure. The other one doesn't fail but succeeds in his mission. Okay, so I want to go through this here and see if we can see how both men are being put on trial. We tend to focus, this is Jesus' trial and Peter's denial, yes, but both men are being tried, and they respond very differently. I want us to see that. Verse 15. And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. So that Jesus had been carried away. Peter and another disciple, perhaps John, creep up behind. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. So it's likely John. Why? Because John writes this, and if it was Philip, let's say, he would have just said Philip, but he doesn't refer to himself. Now that disciple was known to the high priest, went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. So he's kind of got it in. But Peter stood at the door outside. Then the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, as a reminder, went out and spoke to her who kept the door and brought Peter in. So he says, hey, can my buddy come in? Yeah. Then the servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, you are not also one of this man's disciples, are you? He said, I am not. Now the servants and officers who made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves, and Peter stood with them and warmed himself. Now when Jesus is asked, are you Jesus of Nazareth, he responds with, I am. When asked, when Peter is asked, are you a disciple, he responds with, I am not. And we're going to see Jesus's I ams, the contrast is Peter has I am nots. He's not being asked the same question, but where Jesus is willing to deny nothing, right? I am. Peter denies everything. I am not. I am not. I am not. Jesus knew who he was. Are you Jesus of Nazareth? I am. Are you one of his disciples? Peter's like, I am not. One moment he is. The next minute he's not. 1 minute, in time, this was half hour, an hour ago maybe. Peter's standing there with Jesus telling him, you're going to, deny me. And Peter says, no, I'll die for you. Now he's not willing to die, right? Not so much in chapter 18. In chapter 13, big talk. Chapter 18, I am not his disciple. And we're meant to see this contrast between the two of them. And it's not just so that we think poorly of Peter. Peter, he's like the worst disciple. That's not the point. The point is any of us could be Peter. That's the scary thing, is that any one of us could be Peter. Peter's not, just this worst disciple. He's any of us who are capable of big emotions and strong sentiments 1 minute and then backing off in the next. And all for God and all for his glory 1 second. We're all excited and we come to the front and the altar and we kneel down and we're prayed over and we're going to do this. And then, months later, we just kind of back to, we attend, we lose the enthusiasm, this. And that's not even denying, but that's we're up and down is the point, and so is Peter. Any one of us could be Peter. Any one of us could be Judas, and that's the point of these stories. Any of us could, we're no better than these men, and I don't think we're meant to see ourselves as better than them. That's not the point of it, because Jesus tells his disciples, apart from being connected to the vine, you can do nothing. And that's what we need to see. Apart from him, we can do nothing. Apart from him, we're no better than Peter. Apart from him, we're no better than Judas. We're just as capable of these men of failure. Apart from him, we can do nothing. But in him, right, he says, you guys can do, anything I ask you to do, you can do. So what we see again in this chapter is we see the failure of really two men, both Judas and Peter. And in contrast, we have Jesus who does not fail. Jesus who succeeds in his mission. Jesus who doesn't deny. Jesus who knows who he is and isn't ashamed. Verse 19, the high priest then asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where the Jews always meet, and in secret I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said. And when he had said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, do you answer the high priest like that? Jesus answered him, if I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. So he sends him off. Here Jesus is just noting that he's confident. I don't need to reiterate these teachings. Ask any of my guys. Ask any of the people who are around at all these, high social functions. I went to all the biggest gatherings we have in Judea. I showed up at them, and I taught at them. And ask anybody there what I said. I spoke openly. Check with them. And he's confident, in particular in his disciples, that they can carry on. And this is another way of Jesus's, for the disciples in the years to come, to be encouraged, to know that Jesus felt, I gave the message to them, they've got it. They can teach this. They can do this. And he's also clear here that he has nothing to hide. He says, I spoke openly to the world. And again, this is a contrast. Jesus here denies nothing. I've spoken openly. I am he. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. I am. And I've spoken openly to the world. I didn't say anything in secret. And so Jesus is ready to deny nothing. And in contrast, Peter is ready to deny everything. Now Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. Therefore they said to him, You are not also one of his disciples, are you? He denied it and said, I am not. One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off, said, Did I not see you in the garden? Did you not cut off, my cousin's ear just like a few minutes ago? Peter then denied again, and immediately a rooster crowed. So, Peter's even being grilled by people who just saw him minutes before, hacking off an ear. Weren't you with him? No, I'm not with that guy, right? So here's Peter's failure, complete with rooster crow, just as Jesus said would happen. Three at-bats, 3 strikeouts for Peter. He gives these 3 big I am nots in contrast to Jesus's I am. Something to consider here too is that Peter, in his denial and his failure to stand with Jesus, is not only denying his relationship with Jesus. He's not only denying Jesus and leaving him on his own. Like, I'm not with that guy. He's on his own from this point on, right? That's bad enough. But he's also denying himself. If you remember, Jesus had just told these guys, again, moments before, looked them in the eye and said, you did not choose me, but I chose you. Right? He reminded them, I handpicked you guys to be my disciples. And in this moment, Peter is denying his God-given ministry, his God-given position, his God-given identity as a disciple of Jesus, like one of the original 12, right? This is who you are. I chose you to be this. And in this moment, Peter is saying, I'm not that. I'm not that. As we go through the rest of John now, we won't meet up with Peter again until the empty tomb, until Mary comes to the empty tomb and runs back, and she runs back to Peter and John. So he's kind of out of the picture here for a couple chapters. Judas is never mentioned again. So in the other Gospels, we have Judas running and throwing the money back. We have Judas hanging himself. In the book of Acts, he's not only hung himself, but like his guts all fall out. And John doesn't give us any of that. Judas is just out of the picture. He's done his deed, and now he slips into non-existence as far as the rest of the story goes. And so, but what we do have in this chapter is, the failure of these 2 men. And failure, I've found, and I've talked a few times about writing some books, just things that interest me, and one of them is on relief. The power of relief. Relief is such a wonderful thing. Failure is another one of those topics that interests me because I feel it's so often avoided. Not just failing. Sure, we avoid wanting to fail, but even talking about failure and using the word. Because failure is a harsh word. It seems an unforgiving word. It seems to be a word describing something nobody can bounce back from. We even now have epic fail, right? Which just means of huge proportions. This fail was so big, it's like the worst thing you can do. There are aspects of my life that I would call failure, and I'm not just talking about as a 9-year-old driving a quad into a swimming pool. That's kind of a fun fail, but I've had what I would call some major fails. I've really blown it, and my experience has been when trying to talk to others about that. I say, well, I've really failed at this. Is that in my experience, people have been very uncomfortable with that. I think that word failure, and try to reframe it for me so that it's not so bad. Oh, no, don't say that, and maybe try to take some of the blame off of me. Well, other people were involved, or may refer to it as a mistake, because we all make mistakes, right? Mistakes aren't so bad. Downplay it, try to point out the good, but it wasn't no, don't call it a fail. It wasn't a fail because look what, and try to make, and I understand that because we want to see the bright side of things, and I can understand too in trying to counsel people who come to me and say, oh, I failed, and you try to find out, try to help them get through it. We don't want people to just sit in a sack of failure, just in the darkness with the word failure. But I'm not uncomfortable at all talking about Peter having failed, right? I think he absolutely failed Jesus. I think he failed himself. I think he failed his fellow disciples. I think he failed, as I hadn't even pointed out, but it's true. He failed to evangelize when given with a God-given opportunity. People asking, "Aren't you one of his disciples? Aren't you with that guy?" Yeah, and actually for the last 3 years, we've been going around Judea. You should have seen and then boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom, evangelism, witnessing, faithful witnessing, and Peter blows that opportunity, like we all have. So, and so Peter totally failed. I fail. I believe we all fail. And learning to deal with that, I think, is a whole separate sermon, maybe even a sermon series. Like I said, maybe a book someday on the importance of handling failure well and dealing with that well, and not shying away from talking about it or dealing with it, not trying to always make it not seem so bad. Or I think we miss opportunity to learn, when everything is kind of given a brighter. And of course, there's an unhealthy aspect of failure. There can be those, and I tend to be this way, to call everything a fail. Like a perfectionist, and nothing's right. Nothing's right enough. Nothing's good enough. We never get it right. We're always failing, and so that can be really unhealthy. And so, I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about, when there is something that we get wrong, and being able to say, "I've got that wrong," and not try to blame somebody else for it. Not try to talk about all the conditions that weren't fair, but just say, "I got that wrong." Imagine Peter reflecting on this moment. Must have been horrible. But if Peter had then, or somebody had come alongside Peter, "Oh, Peter, well, why? I know you're," he's weeping bitterly, it says in the other Gospels, and just come alongside him and to try to help him, encourage him, but then to not be helpful by not allowing him to feel the weight of that failure. That was a failure, right? And he needed to feel, I think, the weight of that moment, and then be encouraged and lifted up as Jesus does with him. We'll get to that. But anyway, to be able to sit in that for a bit, I think, is another sermon series. But the point I want to leave you with here in this time around is that chapter 18 is telling the story of two trials. Jesus is on trial, Peter is on trial, and in Peter's trial, he denies everything, denies himself, denies who he is. He's in denial of the ministry he's been a part of, the God that he knows and sees as the Christ. He denies all of that, while Jesus denies nothing. "I am," he says. "We're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. Whom are you seeking?" "Jesus of Nazareth. I am. I've been teaching openly. Ask anybody what I've said. It's all out there for you to look at. I don't hide any of it. Peter was completely dishonest in his trial. That's the other thing we have to look at. He's lying, right? In his denial, it's a lie that he gives, and Jesus is completely honest. "I'm Jesus of Nazareth. Look at everything I've ever said. Let's deal with it. It's all there. Ask anybody." So Peter fails in his trial, and Jesus does not. And so, for just something to close out on, something to think about, is that we come and we worship the one who does not fail. And I think it's a easy and perhaps obvious takeaway from this, but I think oftentimes we look at the tragedy of Peter's failure, and then we look at the tragedy, if you will, the unfairness, the injustice or injustice, all that stuff in Jesus' trial. But and that stuff's there, but we also need to see that Jesus does not fail in his mission. He does not fail, and he even stops somebody who tries to, save him. He's like, this isn't the moment to save me. I've got to go through with this. I've got to complete this. Let's stop this. Then Jesus doesn't fail to tell the truth. I am, he says. I've told the whole world. Ask anybody what I've said. I'm totally open. I'm an open book. Jesus didn't fail, as we look through his ministry. He didn't fail to love. He didn't fail to show mercy. He didn't fail to be forgiving, as we'll see even with Peter, who's just failed him big time. Jesus will come alongside him and show him love and forgiveness and mercy and reinstate him not only as a disciple, but Peter goes on to lead the church. He doesn't set Peter aside. Well, I gave you a shot at leadership. You blew it, and now you are, you'll be down cleaning the disciples' toilets, from here on out. But you can still be a disciple. Makes him a leader. Gives him a total, not just another shot way down lesser, but brings him right back. And we see that Jesus doesn't fail in his trial. He doesn't fail in his mission. And just the importance of that to carry with us, the God that we worship, that has been revealed to us by Jesus, is one who does not fail. And to hold on to that. Hold on to that in whatever trial you're going through. We talk about trials. Whatever it is you're struggling with, the one who walks with you does not fail. And if he's made a promise, he doesn't fail to keep it. If he's, and he said he would be with us, and he would never forsake us. He will not fail. There won't be a moment where he forsakes us. He will hold to that, because this is who he is. And we see this character of God coming through in the story, where even when there's all these opportunities, if you will, to bow out, he never does that, because this is his character, is one who does not fail. So as you worship, and I know we're doing this on video and we're not doing music, but I'd encourage you, find some worship music, either on the radio or, if you've got music you like to worship, just sit and enjoy that for some time here. Do it through prayer. Do it through just some meditation, just meditating on he's the one who does not fail. And encourage yourself in that. See what he does through that, that acknowledgement of the one who does not fail. Remember that, this week, as things get difficult and you have things come up and whatever it may be, go to the one who does not fail, because we fail, other people fail us. That's the reality of humanity. But the reality of divinity is he is one who does not fail, and we need to keep that with us as we go. So glad you joined us. Look for us again next week. Our church is hoping to start meeting in sight again, maybe even next week, and we're looking forward to that. I'm planning to continue videos at least for a while, so maybe at least through the book of John. We'll finish that up through November here, see what happens after that. But thanks for tuning in. Feel free to comment, pass anything along that has encouraged you or blessed you, or if you have questions, you can send those to me also. I'm happy to work with you on that, and just pray blessing over you, that God would walk with you and that you would know better this week, the one who does not fail.